It was supposed to be the happiest day of my life, the day I walked down the aisle to marry the man I loved, surrounded by the people who mattered most. But as I stepped into the church, I froze. There she was, my sister wearing my wedding dress, standing at the altar in my place. The moment I had dreamed of for years was gone, stolen in the blink of an eye. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was realizing that this wasn't the first time my sister had taken something from me. She had been doing it my whole life, and this time, I wasn't going to let her get away with it. What happens when the people you trust most betray you in the worst way? What happens when family turns into the biggest lie of all? This is the story of my wedding day, the day everything I thought I knew about love, family, and loyalty was shattered. And it's just the beginning of a journey that would change me forever. If you are new or yet to subscribe to this channel, this is the time to do so. And you will not miss any of the true life story that are shared on this channel. Hi, my name is Claire. The church bells tolled, filling the air with a sound I had always imagined would bring me peace. Instead, I felt a tightness in my chest, a lump in my throat that threatened to suffocate me. I had dreamed of this day since I was a little girl, the day I would walk down the aisle in my perfect dress, my father's arm steady by my side, and my heart full of love for the man who was waiting at the altar. The day everything would feel like a fairy tale. But nothing about this day was a fairy tale. I stood frozen in the doorway, my breath hitching in my throat. The scene before me was a blur of white, bright, pristine, and utterly wrong. My sister, my flesh and blood, stood there at the front of the church, in my wedding dress. The dress I had picked out with such painstaking care. It was supposed to be my day. I had worked for this. I had planned this. And now, standing in the doorway, watching my sister twirl in the mirror as if she were the bride, I realized in that single moment that everything I had hoped for was gone. I should have known something was off. The past few months had been filled with subtle signs, small shifts in behavior, little moments of jealousy that I had overlooked. But I never expected this. My sister wearing my dress, standing in my place, as if she were the one about to marry the man I loved. She wore the smile of someone who had just won a prize, the one I had dreamed of having for myself. The dress sparkled under the church lights, just as it had always been meant to on my wedding day. But now it was her. I felt the sting of betrayal flood through me like a fire, sharp and uncontrollable. How could she, how could the one person I trusted most, the one I had loved and defended, do this to me? I had always considered us to be close, sisters, best friends. But now, standing there in the cold silence of the church, I realized that I had been blind to her manipulations, blind to the fact that she had been preparing for this moment all along, waiting for the right opportunity to take everything from me. I felt the eyes of the room on me, guests, family, friends, all watching, waiting for something to happen. I was supposed to be the one in the center of attention, walking down that aisle, but my sister had stolen that from me, and I stood there, helpless, unable to move. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run forward and pull the veil from her face, to rip the dress off her body and demand that she leave. But I could not. I could not move, could not speak, could not even breathe. My world had just shattered, and all I could do was watch as she smiled, her face glowing with a satisfaction that made my stomach turn. The woman I had called my sister had stolen my life. As the seconds stretched into what felt like hours, I could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on me. How had it come to this? How had I let her take everything from me? The answer was painfully clear. I had trusted her. I had believed in her. She was my sister, my blood, and I had never imagined that she would betray me like this. I had been so caught up in the excitement of my wedding, so absorbed in my own dream, that I had failed to see the truth. The truth was that my sister was not the loving, selfless woman I had believed her to be. She was a woman willing to destroy everything in her path for the sake of her own ego. She had spent months, maybe even years, quietly plotting this moment, and she had succeeded. I had let her. And now, standing in the doorway of the church, I realized just how deep her betrayal ran. My mind raced as I tried to make sense of what I was seeing. My sister, the one person I had trusted with my deepest secrets, had stolen my moment. She was now the center of attention, the one everyone was watching, the one everyone was talking about. It wasn't supposed to be like this. It was supposed to be my day. The day I would finally feel like I was living my dream, but instead it was a nightmare, and I was trapped in it. I stood frozen for what felt like an eternity, unable to comprehend the reality of what was happening. My family was in shock, and so was Matt, my fiancé. I could see the confusion in his eyes, the pain, the disbelief. He looked from me to my sister, unsure of what was happening, unsure of how to respond. How could I explain this to him? How could I explain to him that the woman he thought he knew, the woman I had always considered my best friend, had just destroyed the most important day of my life? And as the realization hit me, the anger began to build. It began as a slow simmer, but it grew stronger with every passing second. How could she do this to me? How could she take everything I had worked for, everything I had dreamed of, and twist it into her own selfish desire for attention? I wanted to confront her, to scream, to make her understand how much she had hurt me, but I knew that I could not. The moment had already passed. The damage was done. She had taken my wedding, and now she was going to take everything else from me. I turned away from the door, retreating into the shadows, away from the prying eyes of the guests and family. I could not stay there any longer. I could not bear to watch her bask in the glory of my moment. I needed to get away. I needed to think, but where could I go? How could I escape the nightmare that had become my reality? As I left the church, I felt the weight of my sister's betrayal crush me with every step. How could I ever trust her again? How could I ever look at her the same way? The road ahead seemed uncertain, and I felt completely alone. But deep down, I knew this was just the beginning of something far darker than I had ever imagined. This was only the first betrayal of many, and I was about to face the consequences of a family broken beyond repair. The days that followed my sister's betrayal were a blur of confusion, shock, and unbearable silence. I had never imagined that something as monumental as my wedding day could be taken from me so quickly, so effortless. My world had shattered, and I was left standing in the wreckage, unable to piece it back together. I tried to keep moving forward, but with every step, I felt the weight of what had happened pressing down on me. I stayed away from the family for days, hiding in the quiet of my apartment, replaying the moment in my mind over and over again. How had I missed it? How had I missed the signs that my sister, the one person I thought I could trust, had been plotting my downfall all along? It was only when I finally mustered the courage to speak to my mother that the pieces of the puzzle began to fit together. But even then, the truth was slow to reveal itself, like peeling away layers of an onion, each layer more painful than the last. My mother, her voice shaky and filled with guilt, told me she had suspected something for a long time. She told me that my sister had always craved attention, that she had always wanted to be the center of everything. My mother had always chalked it up to her being the second child, always in my shadow, but it was clear now that it was more than that. It was never about being second, honey, my mother said, her voice breaking. It was about wanting what you had, your happiness, your life, everything you built. I felt my stomach turn at the words. She had wanted my life. She had wanted to take everything I had. But why? What did she hope to gain by destroying me? As I sat there in the dim light of my apartment, I began to feel the rage bubble up inside me. My sister, the person who had shared every part of my life with me, who had been there through my worst days, had done this to me. She had taken everything I loved and turned it into her own twisted version of the truth. She had made herself the star of my show, the queen of my day, and left me with nothing. I began to remember all the moments when things had felt off between us, moments I had brushed off or tried to ignore, the way she had subtly undermined me over the years, always questioning my choices, always finding ways to make me feel less. At the time, I had dismissed it as sibling rivalry or harmless teasing, but now I saw it for what it truly was: jealousy. She had always been jealous of me, of my life, of the things I had worked so hard for, It wasn't just the wedding. No, that was just the culmination of years of resentment and bitterness. My sister had always been the one to get the most attention, always the one to be praised. I was the quieter one, the more reserved one, always in the background, content to let her shine. But somewhere along the way, that had changed, and I had never noticed. As I thought back to my childhood, I realized that she had always been the one to push me aside. She had always been the one to take center stage. I had never minded, or at least, I told myself I did. But as I grew older, I began to see the toll it had taken on me. I had sacrificed my own identity to make her happy, to make her feel like she was the most important person in the room. But now, as I looked back on everything, I realized just how much of myself I had given up, how much of my own dreams I had buried to support hers, and now she had taken the one thing that was supposed to be mine, the one thing I could never get back. I spent the next few days in a haze, barely eating, barely sleeping, as I struggled to understand the full scope of what had happened. I could not shake the image of her in my wedding dress, standing there as if nothing had happened. She was so proud of herself, so confident in her role as the bride. It sickened me. But what hurt even more was the fact that my family had stood by her. They had all known what was happening, and not one of them had the courage to stop. My parents had watched as she took everything from me, and they had said nothing. They had allowed her to destroy my dream, and they had done nothing to stop it. It was not just my sister who had betrayed me, it was my entire family. They had known about her plans, and they had done nothing to intervene. My mother had been complicit, even if she did not realize it. She had been blind to my sister's true nature, just as I had been. I had always been the good daughter, the obedient one, the one who followed the rule. But now I saw that my sister had been the one who got away with everything. She had manipulated everyone around her, using her charm and beauty to get what she wanted, and I had fallen for it. I had let her take everything from me, and I had allowed my family to let her. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. How had I allowed myself to be so blind? How had I let her destroy me without even knowing it? As the days wore on, I began to feel a sense of clarity. This was not just about the wedding, this was about something much deeper. My sister had been trying to take my life from me for years, and I had never seen it. She had slowly, quietly chipped away at my happiness, until there was nothing left but her, and I had allowed it. But no more. I would not allow her to take everything from me any longer. I would not let her win. I would not let her destroy me. The first step was to confront her, to finally face and make her understand the pain she had caused. But as I prepared to face, I realized that it would not be easy. She would not apologize. She would not admit what she had done. She would continue to lie, to manipulate, and to twist the truth until it suited her. But I was ready. I had to be. I was done being the good sister, the obedient one. I was done letting her control my life. I had spent too many years living in her shadow, and now it was time for me to step into the light. I did not know what the future held, but I knew one thing for sure: I would never let her steal anything from me again. I woke up the next morning with a headache that made it feel as though my very soul had been torn apart. The events of the previous day, my sister's betrayal, were still fresh in my mind. The image of her standing at the altar in my wedding dress haunted me like a ghost I could not escape. I could feel my blood boil every time I thought about it. How could she do that to me? How could she, of all people, ruin the most important day of my life? But the anger I felt was nothing compared to the shame that gripped me. I had been so blinded by my love for my sister, so desperate to keep the peace in our family, that I had never questioned her intentions. I had spent my entire life putting her first, supporting her dreams, always standing in the shadows, never once thinking that she might want to take everything I held dear. How had I missed the signs? How had I allowed her to manipulate me for so long? The truth began to sink in. She had been plotting this for months, maybe even years. The wedding had been her final act of control, the culmination of a lifelong campaign to steal everything from me. I had known she was always the center of attention in our family. She was the one who everyone looked to for approval, the one who commanded the room with her presence, and I had always let her. I had always been content to step aside, to let her have her moment in the spotlight. I thought I was being a good sister, a supportive one, but now I saw that I had been a fool. I decided I would confront her. I could not go on living with this crushing sense of betrayal. I needed answers. I needed to understand why she had done this to me, and I needed to make her understand the pain she had caused. It took a few days for me to summon the courage to speak to her. Every time I thought about it, my heart raced and my hands trembled, but I knew I had to do it. I could not let this go. The confrontation came on a Sunday afternoon. My sister, as usual, was sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone, completely unaware of the storm that was about to hit. She looked up when I walked in, and for a moment I saw a flicker of guilt in her eye, but it was gone in an instant, replaced by that same smug, self-assured smile she always wore. "Can we talk?" I asked, my voice tight with anger and hurt. "Sure," she replied casually, as if nothing had happened, as if nothing had changed. I sat down across from her, trying to steady my breathing. This was it. This was the moment I had been waiting for. "I don't understand why you did it," I began, my voice trembling slightly. "Why would you do something so cruel, so You knew how important that day was to me, and yet you stole it from me. You took my wedding, my happiness, and turned it into something else entirely. Why?" She looked at me, her eyes narrowing as if she were trying to understand what I was saying, but I could see the faintest glimmer of satisfaction in her gaze. She knew exactly what she had done. "Look," she said, shrugging her shoulders nonchalantly, "it wasn't meant to be that big of a deal. I didn't think you'd be so upset about it. It was just a dress, a moment. I thought it'd be fun." I could feel my blood begin to boil again, my hands clenched into fists at my sides. I had spent months planning that day, preparing for it, imagining it, and for her it was just a dress, just a moment. "Fun," I repeated, my voice rising. "Do you know what you've done? Do you know how much you've hurt me? How much you've destroyed? That wasn't fun. That was a betrayal. You've taken away the one thing that should have been mine. You've taken away my moment, my dream, and for what? To make yourself the center of attention. Is that it?" She didn't flinch, her face remained calm, collected, as if she were somehow unaffected by my words. It was as though she had been expecting this, as though she knew that eventually I would come to her, desperate for an explanation, but there was no apology in her eyes, no remorse. "I didn't mean to hurt you," she said, her tone almost too smooth, too rehearsed. "I just thought, maybe it was time for you to step aside for once. You've always had everything. You've always been the one to get everything. Maybe it was time for me to have my moment." I stared at her, shocked by what I was hearing. This was not a sister asking for forgiveness. This was a woman who had justified her actions, a woman who had somehow convinced herself that she was the one who had been wronged. It was all about her. Always had been, always would be. "You think I've always had everything?" I asked, my voice cracking with emotion. "You think I've always had the perfect life? You think I've always gotten everything I wanted?" For the first time I saw a flicker of doubt in her eye. It was as if she had never truly understood the depths of my pain, the sacrifices I had made. "I've worked my whole life for the things I've had," I continued, my voice shaking with a mixture of anger and sorrow. "I've worked for my happiness, my love, my future. And you've taken it all, just like that. You've destroyed everything I've worked for, just because you couldn't stand being in the shadows for once. You wanted it all, and now you have it. But at what cost?" She opened her mouth to speak, but I cut her off. I could not let her manipulate me any longer. "You don't get to play the victim here," I said, my voice low and steady. "You don't get to make this about you. You don't get to hurt me and then expect me to forgive you with a smile." The room fell silent, and for the first time I felt a sense of power, of control. I had finally stood up for myself, finally faced the truth of what had happened. I had let my sister control my life for far too long, and I was done. She didn't apologize. She didn't beg for my forgiveness. Instead, she sat there, her face unreadable, and in that silence, I knew something else, something that had been growing inside me for months. This was the end. My sister had taken everything from me, but now it was time for me to take it back. The days following my confrontation with my sister were a blur, each one blending into the next like a fog that refused to lift. I had done what I thought was necessary. I had faced her, demanded answers, and finally understood the full extent of her betrayal. But no amount of confrontation, no amount of harsh words or deep breaths, could undo the damage she had done. The wedding was over, my dream had been shattered, and the scars would remain long after the dust had settled. The fallout was immediate, and it was devastating. I thought that after I confronted her, the air between us would clear. I hoped that somehow, some way, we could salvage what was left of our relationship. I imagined that once she understood the pain she had caused, she would apologize and try to make things right. But what I had failed to see, what I had failed to truly grasp, was that my sister didn't feel the same way I did. She wasn't remorseful, she wasn't sorry, she had no intention of making amends. The reality was that she had been living in a world where only her happiness mattered. And for the first time I saw it clearly. My sister was never going to change. I tried reaching out to my parents, hoping they would understand, hoping they would see the gravity of the situation, but even they were strangely silent, hesitant to take sides. My mother, ever the peacemaker, would not speak against my sister, even though she knew the truth. She had always been the one to smooth things over, to play mediator, and it was suffocating. My father too stayed distant. He refused to intervene, as if the situation was beneath him, as if this drama between his daughters didn't matter. "You need to let it go," my mother said one night, her voice barely above a whisper, as she sat next to me on the couch. "It's just a wedding, you'll get over it. She didn't mean to hurt you, didn't mean to hurt me." I could feel my chest tightening as the words hung in the air. Didn't mean to hurt me, that was the excuse. The hurt ran so deep, and here my mother was, dismissing it like a small misunderstanding. It wasn't just a wedding, it was the culmination of everything I had worked for, everything I had dreamed of. It was the one day that was supposed to be mine, and my sister had stolen it. "How can you say that?" I asked, my voice shaking. "How can you say she didn't mean to hurt me?" "She took everything, Mom, everything." But my mother just sat there, silent. Her eyes were clouded with guilt, and I could see that she was torn. She knew what had happened, but she wasn't ready to admit it, wasn't ready to choose between her two daughters. She could not see what I was seeing, and I couldn't help but wonder, had she ever truly seen me? The conversations with my parents grew more strained. Every time I tried to bring up what had happened, they would change the subject or pretend it didn't matter. I began to feel invisible in my own family, as if my feelings were secondary to everyone else's. My sister's manipulation, her lies, had created a chasm between us, a rift I could not bridge. Meanwhile, Matt had become distant. At first, he had been just as shocked as I was by my sister's action, but as the days passed, I saw the unease in his eyes. Whenever we spoke, he no longer looked at me the same way. He didn't understand why I hadn't seen it coming, why I hadn't been more protective of what was mine. His disappointment was palpable, and worse, he had begun to question whether our relationship could survive the fallout. I was left in a haze of doubt. How could I have not seen what my sister was capable of? How had I let her into my life for so long, only for her to destroy everything I had built? And how could I face the people I loved, knowing that they had all silently condoned her actions? I could feel the walls closing in around me. I spent days avoiding everyone, my family, my friends, even I didn't know how to explain the pain, the sense of betrayal that kept gnawing at me from the inside out. I wanted to scream, to shout at the world for being so unfair, for allowing someone so toxic to be in my life for so long. But most of all, I wanted to scream at myself for not seeing it sooner, for not protecting myself from the person who had been closest to me. I tried to go back to work, to fill my days with something other than the overwhelming sadness that consumed me, but it was impossible. Every time I saw my sister's face on social media, in family photos, in my memories, I felt the sting of what she had done. I couldn't escape it. It wasn't just the wet, it was the years of my life that she had taken from me, the years I had spent supporting her while she secretly undermined me. I had been a puppet in her game, and she had been pulling the strings, manipulating everyone around her to get what she wanted, and I had been too blind to see. I began to question everything. Had I been living a lie all these years? Had my sister always been this person, and I had just been too naive to notice? Or had something inside her changed? Some darkness that I had never seen before, something that had always been there beneath the surface. I tried to talk to Matt again, hoping that he could offer me some guidance, some clarity, but the conversation ended in silence. He had his own wounds, his own confusion to deal with, and I didn't know how to help him. He was hurt too, hurt by the woman I loved, and the betrayal he had witnessed. There was no easy answer. There was no way to fix this. It wasn't just the wedding that had been ruined. My family had been torn apart. The trust I had once had in the people closest to me was gone. My sister's actions had exposed a truth I had never wanted to face. The people I loved were capable of hurting me, just as much as anyone else. They were not perfect. They were not the protectors I thought they were. And that was the hardest part to accept. The realization that at the end of it all, I was alone. As the weeks passed, I tried to move forward, tried to rebuild the pieces of my life that had been shattered. The anger, though still fresh, began to feel like an old familiar weight that I carried with me, one that I had learned to endure in silence. The betrayal was still raw, but I had become numb to the constant ache that lingered beneath the surface. I had become accustomed to the absence of the family I once knew, the empty spaces where love and trust had once resided. I knew that the only way to heal was to distance myself from the people who had failed me. My sister, my parents, even Matt. Everyone seemed to have played their part in the betrayal, some knowingly, others unknowingly, but they had all been complicit in a way, and I had allowed it to happen. It was around that time that I started hearing rumors. At first, they were nothing more than whispers at work, fleeting conversations that I didn't pay much attention to, but soon, those whispers became more pronounced, more pointed. They came from the people closest to me, those who had once been my friends, my ally, and one particular name started popping up in every conversation: Paul. Paul was Matt's best friend, the one person who had always been there for us, the one who had been by our side through thick and thin. But now I was hearing things that made my skin crawl, things that made my blood run cold. The rumors were impossible to ignore. I began to hear that Paul and my sister had been more than just friends. For a long time, I couldn't believe it. My mind rejected the idea at first, unwilling to accept the reality of what I was hearing. How could it be true? Paul had always been like a brother to me. He had been there for me during the hardest moments of my life, offering support and comfort when I needed it most. He had been part of the family. How could he have betrayed me like this? The more I heard, the more I realized I couldn't ignore it any longer. There was something much deeper, much darker at play. My sister's betrayal had not been an isolated incident. It was part of something far bigger. And the truth, as much as I feared it, was beginning to surface. I needed to know the truth. I couldn't live in ignorance anymore. I had to confront the people who had torn my world apart, even if the answers shattered me further. The conversation with Matt came unexpectedly. We hadn't spoken much since the wedding, but one night, after days of avoiding each other, he showed up at my apartment, looking exhausted, worn down. His eyes were hollow, his face etched with the same pain that I felt every time I saw him. "I think we need to talk," he said, his voice low, almost defeated. I didn't know how to react. The thought of talking to him terrified me. I wasn't ready to face the man who had been so closely tied to the destruction of everything I held dear, but I knew I had to. I needed answers. We both did. We sat down in silence, the weight of the moment hanging between us like a thick fog. It was Matt who spoke first, his words almost inaudible, as if they were too heavy for him to carry. "I didn't want to believe it," he said, his voice breaking. "I didn't want to believe that they were involved, but I can't deny it anymore. I found out the truth, the truth." Those two words sent a chill down my spine. I had been waiting for this moment, but I hadn't expected it to feel like a cold knife twisting in my gut. I stared at him, waiting for him to continue, to give me the answers I so desperately needed. "Paul and your sister, they've been having an affair for months," he said, his words slow and deliberate. "I didn't know. I swear to you I didn't know. But now I see. Now I understand why everything fell apart so quickly." The words hit me like a freight train. I couldn't breathe. The room seemed to spin as the reality of what he was saying sank in. "My sister, The woman who had destroyed my wedding had been sleeping with my fiancé's best friend. She had betrayed me in ways I couldn't even comprehend. I could feel the betrayal cut through me, deeper than any wound I had ever known. It was as if the ground had been ripped out from beneath me. I couldn't process it all at once. The shock, the horror, the disgust. It was too much to bear. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper as I fought to keep the tears at bay. "Why didn't you say anything?" "I didn't know how to," Matt admitted, his voice filled with guilt. "I tried to protect you, to shield you from it, but I should have told you. I should have been honest with you from the start." I shook my head, unable to fully grasp what he was saying. The man I had trusted, the man I was supposed to marry, had been deceived, just like me. And yet, he had kept the secret from me. He had allowed this to continue, allowed my sister to tear our lives apart, without ever once coming to me for help. The betrayal I felt was unbearable. It wasn't just my sister who had destroyed me, it was Matt. He had known, and he had kept it from me. How could he have let this happen? How could I have been so blind? "I thought I could trust you," I whispered, the words slipping from my mouth before I could stop them. "But I was wrong. I was wrong about everything." Matt looked at me, his eyes filled with regret. But it was too late. There was no going back. The damage had been done. My sister's betrayal was one thing, but Matt's betrayal was another. They had both conspired against me, both deceived me in ways that left me broken. "I'm so sorry," he said, his voice pleading, but I could not listen anymore. I stood up, unable to face him any longer. I could not look at the man I had once loved, the man I thought I could trust, knowing that he had been part of this sick game. "I need you to leave," I said, my voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside me. "I can't do this anymore. I can't be with someone who has hurt me like this." And with that, Matt stood up and left, leaving me alone in the quiet of my apartment, surrounded by the wreckage of my life. The truth was finally out, but it did nothing to heal the wound. The twist, the revelation of my sister's affair with Paul had changed everything. And now, all I was left with was the aftermath. A shattered future, a broken heart, and the stark reality that the people I had trusted most had betrayed me in ways I would never be able to forget. The silence after Matt left was deafening. I stood in the middle of my apartment, the weight of everything sinking into me like a tidal wave. The conversation with him, the confession, the betrayal, had turned everything upside down. What was supposed to be the beginning of my life with the man I loved was now just another wrecked piece of a life I could not recognize. The room felt cold. My apartment, once filled with the soft hum of the life I'd envisioned with Matt, now felt like a prison. The air was thick with the ghosts of dreams that would never come true. My heart pounded in my chest, the pulse a constant reminder that my world had shattered, that nothing would ever be the same. I had never expected this. I had never imagined that the two people I trusted most in the world could betray me so completely. Matt, my fiancé, the man I thought I would spend forever with, had been in on it all along. And my sister, the woman I had always thought of as my best friend, had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. What hurt most was that they had done it in the shadows, while I had been out in the open, planning, hoping, believing in my future. They had been in secret, weaving a web of lies. My sister had stolen my wedding day, yes, but that was only the surface. The truth of what they had done to me was far deeper, far more painful. I could still see Matt's face, the look of guilt and regret that had filled his eyes when he told me about Paul and my sister. It was too late for apologies. It was too late for explanations. The trust I had placed in him, in both of them, had been shattered beyond repair. I had given them everything, my love, my trust, my future, and they had destroyed it all with a single act of betrayal. I needed to get out. I needed to escape the memories, the feelings that threatened to consume me. My hands trembled as I reached for my phone, scrolling through contacts, looking for someone to call, but I knew there was no one. My friends, the few I had left, had distanced themselves from me since the wedding, unsure of how to react, how to support me through this mess. My family, well, they were no longer an option. I had cut ties with them, with my sister especially, but even my parents couldn't seem to understand the full scope of what had happened. They couldn't see that it wasn't just a wedding that had been taken from me. It was everything. I found myself standing at the door, staring out into the darkened world beyond. I needed a change. I needed to leave. I couldn't stay in this place anymore, surrounded by memories of a life that no longer felt mine. The city felt too small, too suffocating. I needed space to breathe, to think. I packed my bag with a hurried urgency, grabbing only what I could carry: my clothes, my shoes, a few mementos, things that mattered, things that I could keep, things that could remind me of the person I had been before everything fell apart. I couldn't take the apartment with me. I couldn't take the memories, but I could take control of my future. I could make the decision to walk away. As I stood in front of the door, the weight of it all threatened to crush me, but I was done being crushed. I was done being a victim. I drove aimlessly out of the city and into the quiet of the countryside. The road stretched out before me, empty, quiet, as if the world itself was giving me the space I so desperately needed. I didn't know where I was going. I didn't care. I just needed to leave, to escape. As I drove, the tears came. They were quiet at first, soft and slow, as if my body was catching up with the emotional toll of everything that had happened. The betrayal, the lies, the pain, it all poured out of me in a flood of emotion. I let it happen. I let the tears come, because I knew that this was the only way I could start healing. I couldn't hold it in anymore. I had to let it all out. The drive was long. It felt like days, even though it was only a few hours. I found myself on a winding road, surrounded by trees, the quiet of the world offering me a kind of peace that I hadn't known in a long time. I needed this solitude, this space. I didn't know what was waiting for me when I came back, but for now I had to focus on taking care of myself. And then, as if the universe had conspired to add to my torment, I saw it. The sign by the side of the road: "Welcome to Lakeview," the town where I had spent summers as a child, the town where I had once felt safe, where I had believed my family was whole. I slammed the brakes, the car jerking to a stop on the side of the road. My heart began to race as memories flooded my mind. This place, this town, it was where I had spent so many of my happiest days. It was where my parents had taken me every summer, where I had laughed and played with my sister. It was a place of innocence, of joy, and now it was a place of memories I could not escape. I sat there for a long time, the engine idling in the silence, trying to make sense of what had brought me here. I didn't want to go back. I didn't want to face the past. But deep down, I knew I had to. I had to confront what had happened, not just with my sister and Matt, but with my entire life. I got out of the car and walked to the lake. The water was still, the moonlight reflecting off its surface, creating a perfect, serene scene. But it was all a lie. Beneath the surface, there was a storm brewing, a storm I could no longer ignore. As I stood there, staring into the water, I realized something. I had spent so much of my life giving to others, supporting them, loving them, without ever asking for anything in return. I had sacrificed myself for my family, for my sister, for Matt, but now I had to choose me. The reckoning had come, and I was ready. I had been broken, but I was no longer going to let the pieces define me. The woman who had walked down the aisle just a few weeks ago was gone, but I was not going to let her be the last version of myself. I was going to rebuild, from the ground up. As I stared at the still lake, the moonlight dancing on the surface, I made a vow to myself. I would not let this define me. I would not let them win. This was my life now, and I was going to take control of. The days I spent by the lake blurred together, each one heavy with silence and thought. I had come here to escape, But instead, I found myself trapped inside my own head, haunted by the ghosts of memories I could not forget. The stillness of the water, the rustling of the trees, the crisp night air, it all reminded me of the summers of my childhood, when life had felt simple and safe. But now, that safety felt like an illusion, a lie that had hidden the darkness that always lingered beneath the surface. I thought about my sister constantly. I tried not to, but no matter what I did, her image intruded into my thoughts. I saw her standing at the altar in my dress, basking in the attention that should have been mine. I saw her with Paul, the smug glances they must have exchanged when they thought no one was watching. I heard her voice, cool and dismissive, telling me that I had always had everything, as though that justified the way she had destroyed me. But it wasn't just her actions that haunted me. It was the realization of what she had become, or maybe what she had always been. I had spent my whole life believing that my sister loved me, that she supported me, that we were bound by something unshakable. But the truth was something far more sinister. She had always been jealous, always resentful, always waiting for the chance to take what was mine. And when the chance finally came, she didn't hesitate. She took it with both hands, and never looked back. The truth cut deeper than I could bear. It wasn't just my wedding she had taken. It was my trust, my faith in family, my belief in the bond we shared. And once that was gone, there was nothing left. At night, when the world was quiet and the lake shimmered under the silver glow of the moon, I would sit alone on the dock and let the memories flood me. I remembered the small signs I had ignored, the backhanded compliments, the way she always managed to twist situations in her favor, the way she always had to be at the center of attention. I had dismissed them all as quirks, as harmless traits of her personality, but now I saw them for what they truly were: warnings. Warnings that I had chosen to ignore because it was easier to believe in the illusion of family than to face the reality of who she was. And yet, as much as the betrayal consumed me, there was something else gnawing at the edges of my mind. Something darker, something that had begun to take shape ever since Matt had confessed the truth about Paul. My sister's affair with him wasn't just about jealousy. It wasn't just about stealing my wedding. There was something more to it, something I couldn't quite grasp. It was as though there was a deeper secret hidden beneath it all, a secret that threatened to unravel everything I thought I knew. I couldn't shake the feeling that my family had known all along. My mother's dismissive words, my father's silence, the way they had refused to take a stand. It all made sense now. They hadn't just been trying to keep the peace, they had been protecting her life, protecting the image of the perfect family, even if it meant sacrificing me in the process. The thought made my stomach turn. Had I been nothing more than a pawn in their game? Had my entire life been shaped by their silence, their refusal to confront the truth about my sister? The questions swirled in my mind, each one more painful than the last. I began to dig. It started small: old photo albums, letters, scraps of memories from the summers we had spent at the lake. But the more I looked, the more I found cracks in the story of our family. There were missing pieces, moments that didn't add up. Why had my parents always treated her differently? Why had they always excused her behavior, while expecting me to carry the weight of responsibility? Why had I always been the one to sacrifice, to step aside, to give up what was mine for her sake? It was as though there was a truth they were hiding, a truth that explained everything, and I was determined to find it. The reckoning wasn't just about my sister anymore. It was about my family, about the secrets they had buried, about the lies that had shaped the course of my life. I couldn't rest until I knew the full story, until I understood why they had allowed this to happen, why they had chosen to protect her instead of me. The first clue came in the form of a photograph. It was tucked away in an old album, buried beneath years of dust and neglect. The picture showed my parents, younger, smiling, holding two children. One was me, the other was my sister, but something about the photo felt wrong. The date written on the back didn't match. It was off by years, and as I stared at the photo, a thought struck me that made my blood run cold. What if she wasn't really my sister? The idea seemed absurd at first, ridiculous even, but the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. The favoritism, the excuses, the way they had always treated her as though she were untouchable. What if she wasn't my sister at all? What if she was someone else entirely? Someone they had taken in, someone they had kept hidden beneath the guise of family. The possibility left me shaken. I didn't want to believe it, but I couldn't ignore it either. The photograph, the inconsistencies, the silence, it all pointed to something I had never considered before. And suddenly, the betrayal took on a whole new meaning. If she wasn't really my sister, then what was she? And why had they kept it from me? The darkness beneath the truth was beginning to surface, and I knew that once it did, my life would never be the same. The photograph gnawed at me like an open wound. I stared at it for hours, turning it over in my hands, trying to make sense of the dates, the faces, the truth buried beneath it. I could see myself in the picture, a toddler with wide eyes and soft blonde curls. Next to me was the girl I had always believed to be my sister, but the more I studied it, the less I recognized her. She looked older than the date suggested, too old to be the age the photo claimed, and the smile she wore, it wasn't the innocent grin of a child. It was a smirk, one that seemed eerily familiar to the woman she had become. Something didn't add up. My parents had always been meticulous about recording dates, about labeling our family memories. Why was this photo wrong? Why did it feel like they were trying to cover something, to rewrite a history that wasn't theirs to change? I dug deeper. I tore through boxes of old papers, rummaged through drawers of forgotten files, searching for anything that could explain what I was seeing. And then I found it. An old letter, yellowed with age, tucked inside a folder marked with my father's handwriting. My hands shook as I opened it, my breath catching in my throat as I read the words. It wasn't a letter of love. It wasn't a note of family pride. It was a legal document. Adoption papers. My heart stopped. The name on the paper wasn't mine. It wasn't my parents'. It was hers. My sister. She wasn't my sister at all. She wasn't even their biological daughter. She had been adopted, taken in by my parents when she was just a baby. The room spun as the truth hit me. My whole life, I had believed we were bound by blood, that our connection was unbreakable because we shared the same parents, the same history, but it was a lie. She wasn't my sister. She wasn't my blood. And suddenly, everything made sense. The favoritism, the excuses, the way they had always protected her no matter what she did. She wasn't just their daughter. She was their chosen one, the one they had gone out of their way to bring into their lives, to elevate above me, even though I was their real child. The betrayal cut deeper than anything I had ever known. It wasn't enough that she had taken my wedding, my fiancé, my happiness. Now I realized she had taken my family too. They had chosen her over me, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. They had built their lives around her, sacrificed me for her, and I had been too blind to see. I thought back to all the times my mother had defended her, all the times my father had stayed silent when she hurt me, all the times I had been asked to step aside to forgive, to let her shine. It wasn't just favoritism, it was protection. They had been protecting their secret, protecting her place in the family, no matter how much it cost me. I sat there in the silence of the lake house, the papers spread out before me, my tears soaking the yellowed pages. The truth was unbearable. My family wasn't my family. My sister wasn't my sister. My life, everything I had believed in, was a lie. And in that moment, I realized something else, something that made my blood run cold. If she wasn't truly my sister, then she had no ties to me at all. There was nothing stopping her from destroying me completely, from taking everything that I had left. And with the way she had been acting, with the way she had already taken so much, I knew she wasn't finished. She wasn't done with me, not yet. I drove back into town, with the weight of the adoption papers sitting in my lap, my hands gripping the steering wheel, as if the act of holding on could somehow steady my shaking body. The afternoon sunlight flickered through the trees along the road, casting long, distorted shadows on the pavement, but the world outside felt like a distant memory. The only thing that mattered was what was in those papers, what they meant, and what I was about to do with the truth they revealed. My parents were at the house when I arrived. I had called ahead, told them I needed to talk. They didn't know what was coming, and I wasn't sure how they would react, but I couldn't live with this secret anymore. I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine, not when I had uncovered the truth they had kept from me for so long, the secret that had shaped my entire life without my knowledge. The house looked the same as it always had, familiar, comforting, a place I had always thought of as home. But now, as I stood there at the threshold, it felt foreign, hollow. I had spent so many years thinking my family was one thing, loving, supportive, whole, but now I knew that it had always been a facade, a carefully constructed lie, designed to protect one person, my sister. I didn't need to. My parents knew I was coming, and I had a feeling that they knew why. As I walked into the living room, I saw them sitting there, my mother, my father. They both looked up, their eyes warm at first, but there was something uneasy about the way they looked at me, as if they could sense the storm I was bringing. "Sweetheart, what's wrong?" My mother's voice was soft, but there was an edge of worry in it. She always spoke that way when she knew something was coming. "I need to talk to you both," I said, my voice steady but cold. I had to be cold. If I allowed myself to soften, to let the tears come, I wouldn't be able to do this. I found something. I held up the adoption paper, the crinkled edges, the faded ink. It all seemed so surreal now, so distant from the family I thought I had known. I felt my fingers trembling as I laid the papers on the coffee table between us. My mother's eyes widened, and my father's expression froze. There was no denial in their faces, no confusion, just silence. My father was the first to speak. "What is this?" His voice was quiet, almost too calm, and it made my skin crawl. "You know what it is," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "You know what these papers mean. You've been hiding it from me, from all of us, for years." My mother's face paled, her lips trembling as she reached for the papers. She touched them lightly, as if afraid that the truth might somehow burn her. "Honey, please," she said, her voice cracking. "You don't understand. It wasn't supposed to be like this. We didn't want you to find out this way." "Then how was it supposed to be?" I snapped, the anger rising up inside me. "How was it supposed to be, Mom? You were supposed to be my mother, Dad. You were supposed to be my father, and instead you let her come into our lives. You let her take everything. You protected her, your real daughter, and in doing so, you tore me apart." I could see the guilt in their eyes, but it wasn't enough. It wasn't enough for all the years of silence, for all the moments where I had been pushed aside, in favor of someone who wasn't even supposed to be part of the family. My father cleared his throat, his hands clasped tightly together in his lap. "It wasn't easy, Claire," he said, his voice low. "We didn't know how to tell you. We didn't want to hurt you. You're our daughter. We love you. You love me." I laughed bitterly, the sound harsh in the stillness of the room. "If you loved me, you would have been honest with me. You would have told me the truth. But instead you let me live a lie. You let me believe that I was just as much a part of this family as she was. And you let her take everything from me, my wedding, my future, my life." My mother wiped her eyes, but no tears came. She looked at me, her face soft with guilt. "We never meant for you to feel this way. We didn't want you to suffer, but you don't understand. When we brought her into our lives, she needed us. She needed a family, and we gave it to her, because we thought that was what was right. I didn't need you to give her anything," I said, the hurt spilling out in waves. "I needed you to protect me. I needed you to stand up for me, but you didn't. You did." I could feel the walls closing in on me, the suffocating weight of years of lies pressing down harder with every word. But I couldn't stop now. I couldn't let them get away with this any longer. "She's not my sister, is she?" I asked, my voice trembling with the question I had been afraid to ask. "You chose her. You chose her over me, and I've spent my entire life pretending everything was okay, pretending that I was part of this family, pretending that she was part of." My father's face softened, but only just. "We didn't choose her over you, Claire," he said, his voice strained. "We chose what we thought was right. We thought we were helping her, giving her a chance at a better life, but you were always our daughter. You've always been our daughter." "No," I said, shaking my head, the tears threatening to spill over. "I haven't always been your daughter, not the way she's been. You've always protected her, always forgiven her, always made excuses for her. And what about me, huh? What about the times I needed you? The times I needed your support, and you were too busy shielding her from everything." The silence stretched between us like an abyss. No one spoke. The truth was out, raw and ugly, and there was no turning back. "I can't do this anymore," I whispered, feeling my heart break all over again. "I can't live in a family that keeps secrets from me. I can't pretend that everything's okay when I know the truth. I need to leave. I need to figure this out on my own." I stood up, gathering the papers from the table, holding them close to my chest as if they could somehow protect me from the wreckage. My parents didn't move. They didn't try to stop me. They didn't even "I'm done," I said one last time, my voice steady now as though I had found the strength to walk away from everything that had ever defined me. And with that I walked out the door, leaving behind the family I had once known, the home I had once loved, and the truth that had been buried for far too long. The night I left my parents' house, I drove without direction, the road unraveling in front of me like a ribbon of possibility. The adoption papers sat on the passenger seat, a constant reminder of the truth I had uncovered, the truth that had destroyed everything I thought I knew about family. I had cut ties, severed the bonds that had once tethered me, and now I was free. But freedom did not feel like I imagined it would. It was heavy, it was terrifying, and it was lonely. I stopped at a small motel off the highway, the kind of place where no one asked questions, where the air smelled faintly of cigarettes, and the carpet was worn thin by years of footsteps. I lay in bed that night, staring at the cracked ceiling, listening to the hum of the air conditioner, and wondered how my life had come to this. Just weeks before, I had been preparing for my wedding. I had been filled with joy, anticipation, and hope. And now I was a woman with no wedding, no fiancé, no family. My entire identity had been stripped from me, leaving only the raw bones of a life I did not recognize. But as the hours stretched into dawn, something inside me shifted. For the first time in my life, I had no one to answer to. No sister overshadowing me, no parents dismissing me, no fiancé questioning me. It was just me alone, standing in the ruins of everything I had once known. And in that solitude a seed of strength began to grow. The days that followed were filled with small acts of survival. I found a temporary job in a nearby town, working at a bookstore where the quiet hum of turning pages soothed me. I rented a tiny apartment above a laundromat, the walls thin but the space mine alone. It was not much, but it was each morning, I woke up to the sound of traffic below, and reminded myself that I was still alive, that I still had a chance to rebuild, even if it was from ashes. At night I journaled. I wrote about my sister, about the betrayal, about the adoption papers and the confrontation with my parents. I poured everything onto the page, every hurt, every memory, every ounce of anger and sorrow. The words became a lifeline, a way to bleed out the poison that had been festering inside me for so long. Some nights I cried as I wrote, my tears smudging the ink, but I did not stop. The act of writing was my rebellion, my refusal to let their lies and betrayals define me. Slowly I began to see the patterns. My sister's cruelty was not an accident, it was not a momentary lapse in judgment, it was a lifetime of entitlement, fostered and protected by my parents. They had created her, molded her into someone who believed she could take and take without consequence, and I had been the collateral damage. I had been the shadow, the sacrifice, the one who was always expected to step aside so she could shine, but not any. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the sky turned the color of embers, I walked along the riverbank near my apartment, and made a promise to myself. I would not let them destroy me. I would not let my sister's betrayal or my parents' lies define the rest of my life. I had lost everything, yes, but I was still here, and as long as I was still here, I had the power to rebuild. I thought about what rebuilding would mean. It would mean creating a life that was mine and mine alone, one that did not revolve around pleasing others or protecting secrets. It would mean setting boundaries, standing tall, and refusing to be silenced. It would mean finding out who I truly was, not as a sister, not as a daughter, not as a fiancée, but as a woman who had been broken and had chosen to rise again. The path would not be easy. I knew there would be nights when the loneliness would feel unbearable, when the memories would creep back in and try to drown me, but I also knew that I was stronger than I had ever given myself credit for. I had survived the worst. I had stood in the ruins of my own life and taken the first steps towards something new. That alone was proof of my strength. As I stood there by the river, the water reflecting the last light of day, I let myself feel it all, the grief, the anger, the loss, but also the fragile beginnings of hope. My sister had ruined my wedding day to make herself the center of attraction. My parents had chosen silence and secrets over honesty and love. My fiancé had failed me. They had all played their part in breaking me, but from now on, the story was mine to write. I walked home that night with a steady heart, the cool air brushing against my face, carrying with it the scent of change. For the first time in what felt like forever, I felt a flicker of peace. I had been betrayed, abandoned, and left alone, but I was still standing, and from the ashes of everything I had lost, I would rise again. I was learning to trust again, not others, not right away, but myself. I had come to understand that the foundation of any healthy relationship, whether with family, friends, or a partner, was built on trust, and the first person I had to trust was me. I returned to my love of writing. I found a sense of peace in crafting stories, in weaving together narratives that spoke to the heart. It was through writing that I learned to understand my own pain, to give it shape and form, to process it and turn it into something beautiful. I didn't know where it would take me, but I knew that for the first time in a long time, I was doing something for myself. And one evening, after months of pushing away thoughts of Matt, after months of being consumed by the wreckage he had left behind, I allowed myself to think of him without bitterness. I still carried the scars of his betrayal, but I no longer let them define me. He had been part of the past, and while I would never forget the hurt he had caused, I had made peace with it. He was just another chapter in my story, a painful chapter, but one I could close. I stood by the window of my new apartment, watching the sunset over the city. It was a moment of quiet triumph, a moment where I could finally say that I was okay. I had survived. I had been broken, but I had rebuilt myself. I had walked through the fire and I had come out stronger. The past no longer had a hold on me. I had learned the most important lesson of all. No one, not even family, has the power to take away your happiness, unless you let them, and I wasn't going to let anyone take it again. I smiled to myself, the last remnants of pain, fading into something far more powerful. If this story touches you, subscribe for more heart-touching stories and turn on the notification bell. Remember, your voice matters.